So Unicef began to get involved in cash transfers in Somalia during the 2011-2012 famine. And there it was an extremely useful tool. It was seen as innovative at the time in the sense that we were using it for a very severe kind of natural disaster and humanitarian response. Cash transfers obviously have been part of what we do with social protection and welfare programming in the developed world for a very, very, very long time. So Unicef started to get into cash transfers in Somalia in 2011-2012, and a lot of other partners did the same thing. And it was a very large part of the program, but it was very specifically humanitarian support. So when we started to get towards the post-famine years, so we started to get into 2013, 2014, it continued as a part of our lean season responses that we did in Somalia. And lean seasons are very frequent, they're fairly predictable. The severity is not, but the timing is very predictable in Somalia. So the cash transfer programs continued to be a major part of our humanitarian responses. But the timing is difficult, the amount of funding is very high. So we sort of went into to these lean seasons and would give, say, 3 months of support, 4 months of support, fairly high values, much higher than would be sustainable under a social protection system, and without a lot of predictability to communities, because the support itself sort of shifted around the country according to where we had the most severe either nutrition or food security situations at that time, which is necessary from a humanitarian point of view, but from a social protection point of view, you don't get the benefits of allowing people to have the predictability about their income, to make investment decisions that might help them to mitigate the impacts of shocks over the long term, make investments in new livelihoods, know that they'll have support in a time of need, so they don't have to make decisions that decrease their health and welfare, take their children out of school, things that can have long-term detrimental impacts on human development of their children. The challenge, I think, I mean, there are many in Somalia. The challenge was in part the kind of the funding arrangements in Somalia at this time. So there still are, and there will be for quite some time, true humanitarian needs, severe humanitarian needs that need to be addressed. And I think from a humanitarian perspective, the focus is on life-saving activities very often, with slowly more focus on early recovery, on resilience, on a little bit more of the kind of moving from purely life-saving to a little bit more of the prevention side of things, which is fantastic, but the focus is still very much on that, and it's largely external from the state. There are a lot of considerations about neutrality and things that come into a humanitarian response, which make it difficult to coordinate well with governments. Cash transfers are a tool for social protection, but social protection itself is much broader, and there are many other tools in that toolbox. Obviously, in the middle of humanitarian crisis, the basic, prevention of excess morbidity and mortality is the focus, and that makes sense. But I think, particularly working for an organization that focuses on children and realizing the impacts of these crises on children, if we're going to sustainably get people out of a situation of poverty and deprivation, which lasts through multiple generations, those investments in what we call promotional activities, things like ensuring that children are able to attend school, ensuring that they have the nutrition needed for basic cognitive development to make sure that they can have healthy and productive lives. These investments aren't things that we can ignore while we're focusing just on prevention. We have to look at the interventions that are about bringing people sustainably out of poverty. And I think we saw that very, very sort of vividly in the Horn of Africa famine, where we had children who were pulled out of school in 2011, 2012, and in the majority of cases never went back at the end of the famine. So we're addressing that, we're making sure that they haven't died. Obviously, that's incredibly important. But then, what's next? Because they're facing a lifetime of risks if we don't also focus on the more long-term promotional forms of social protection.